We're all doomed, you know. The whole silly, drunken, pathetic lot of us. Doomed by the air we're about to breathe. We haven't got a chance.
I won't have it, Julian. I won't. There is hope. There has to be hope. There's always hope.
Hello and welcome to every single sci-fi film ever. I'm Aisha Khan. First of all, adverts. I am so sorry as it has been brought to my attention that the adverts on the podcast have been quite excessive. I will be changing platforms very soon. Now on to the film for today. We will be speaking about On the Beach, made in 1959. It was directed by Stanley Kramer, who often made films about social issues, including Judgment at Nuremberg in 1961, and perhaps his most famous films were starring Sidney Poitier, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and The Defiant Ones. On the Beach stars Gregory Peck, Ava Gardner, Fred Astaire and Anthony Perkins, a year before he would star in the seminal Alfred Hitchcock psychological thriller Psycho. On the Beach is based on Nevil Shute's 1957 best-selling novel of the same name, and I am so glad to be done with both of them because although very intriguing, they are both deeply bleak. But hopefully by analysing them, we can gain some distance from being so utterly wrapped in the misery and futility. If it's any consolation, I have chosen a much more fun and rather silly film for next episode. End of the podcast, or take a look at the show notes for details on that. So now on to my wonderful guests. Thomas Doherty is a professor of American Studies at Brandeis University. He is a cultural historian with a special interest in Hollywood cinema, on which he has written extensively. Welcome back to the show, Thomas. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. Joining Tom is John Wills, who's a professor of American media and culture at the University of Kent. He has written a copious amount on popular culture, including 1950s American and nuclear film. Welcome to the show, John. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for the invite.
Great. I wanted to start with the tone of this film because we have done so many films on alien invasion and we've touched upon apocalypse, end of the world, all these kind of threats. But the tone of this film is so bleak. I just wanted to talk about how nuclear war is apparently not fun after all.
And it's really, of course, nuclear war is very depressing. But in cinema, usually we have some compensations. There are radioactive monsters, 50-foot women, that no matter how depressing the nuclear holocaust is, there's other things there to entertain you. And this is a truly bleak motion picture of the kind that you almost never get in Hollywood. That is a film that is advertised as a downer. You know how it's going to end. There's going to be no great Scooby-Doo ending in which people are the atomic cloud is suddenly going to lift and you can ride off into the sunset with Ava Gardner. And I think that makes this film almost unique out of the science fiction films of the 1950s. There are other kind of bleak films like maybe The Day the Earth Stood Still, but most of them give you some kind of hope. And then a lot of them, like I Married a Monster from Outer Space or Them, will give you the compensations of the monsters of the aliens. This is much more like a social problem film in which the social problem is not solved. And of course, Stanley Kramer is known for those kind of films. But typically at the end, you have some sense that the American culture can solve the problem of racism or anti-Semitism or miscegenation, whatever the problem Stanley Kramer is addressing. But in this one,
I completely agree with Tom. I mean, this is the sort of film that is quite hard to get through because of that somber tone. I put it on to rewatch it for this podcast, and my 10-year-old normally likes to watch anything I put on, and he switched off very quickly to this movie. He was not impressed. And there's a theme of a kind of suicide pill kind of option within the movie, and you can almost relate to that by the end of this movie. You almost want to take it yourself. So it is really bleak. From early 50s, the atom might be something that's exciting and a novelty. And we've got music coming out around the atom. We've got atomic cocktails and atomic showgirls in Las Vegas in the early 50s. By the end of the 50s, this film is picking up a very different take on what the nuclear could mean for the United States. So it's a lot more gritty. It's a lot more realistic on some levels. We can talk about that. But it's far more, to me, in tune with kind of realistic, like 1980s films about the atom, whereby nuclear war is a kind of very dark thing, as compared to like a them mutation kind of movie where the atom does kind of strange things and wonderful but grotesque, and far more Hollywood, as Tom says.
If you think of the say a couple maybe partner movies that come after this, like Doctor Strangelove or Failsafe. Of course, Strangelove is the famous black comedy, but even in that film, you're going to go down to the mine shaft. So the 1% of us, the elite, are going to survive. All the educated, important men with beautiful women will go down to mine shafts at the end of the movie. So the nuclear holocaust happens, and at least we assume that you'll be part of the elite going into the mine shafts. And Failsafe, which is in many ways a kind of tonally very similar to this film. Even that film has the devil's bargain where, well, we'll nuke Moscow, so we'll nuke New York because we've inadvertently nuked Moscow, and the species will go on. This is the only film I can think of where the entire species is going to be wiped out at the end of the movie, and you know that from the very beginning, and you really do get the sense of this is the first film that really seriously addresses what the hydrogen bomb can do. That is exploded in the early 1950s. That really changes the tone of the dialogue around nuclear war, because it's no longer like an atomic bomb, which is kind of like 1,000 tons of TNT, and you can kind of get your mind around it. But the hydrogen bomb like wipes out everything in an extraordinary blast radius. And so after the hydrogen bomb has exploded, if you look at American newspapers, from whether it's the Boston Globe or the San Francisco Chronicle or the Chicago Tribune, they'll all have blast radiuses like Chicago, and how far it'll be like the area of total annihilation and devastation. And then, the next concentric circle will be where you die painfully of radiation poisoning in the next few days, the next few weeks, the next few months. And that is, needless to say, has a bracing impact on the culture. But I think this is maybe the only movie we sort of see that acted out.
Absolutely. And I also wanted to touch upon something you'd mentioned, John, that is this even a sci-fi film? Explain yourself.
Okay, well, I'm not sure that I should,
John, explain
should make
yourself.
that claim on this program, should I? That's kind of a kind of taboo thing, I would have thought. I guess for me, yeah, science fiction. You've got the sense of a kind of, the sci-fi films I like to watch. On the Beach is definitely not one of them, and it's that sense of melodrama, the domesticity of this movie, the kind of mundaneness at times of it. But yeah, in my mind, I'm much more excited by the Terminator or Matrix or something that's obviously kind of jumping forward quite a bit in time, and we've got a lot more fantasies about what's going on. So, but I don't want to, I'm not going to make a bigger claim than that. I just thought this is such a kind of a melodramatic kind of piece, domestic piece.
No, I agree, and that's why, despite its utter bleakness, I decided to include it because it's so different to what we've been covering so far. But thank you for that. Yes, I wanted to go on to the marketing and the kind of the scale of this film, Tom, because Gregory Peck and Ava Gardner are not your everyday B-movie or sci-fi fare. These are massive, massive stars. Can you tell us a bit about that?
One of the things I think that's interesting about On the Beach is how we've forgotten about it today. And at the time, in 1959, the film was a huge American cultural and even global cultural event. And I think it's because it's so bleak, it hasn't been revived. So, there are dozens of B movies in the 1950s that seem more alive in our imagination, like Them or I Married a Monster from Outer Space, because these movies have some of the fun elements. This movie has no fun elements, but at
Not
the
at all.
time, it really was kind of a must-see cultural event for any discerning film goer or intellectual. There's a wonderful book on the films of Stanley Kramer by the film scholar Jennifer Frost, and she chronicles this film. And there was a presidential cabinet meeting about it. It reached the level of Department of State had to respond to the film with a special study guide, and it was sort of commented on by every major political op-ed columnist at the time. That nobody who wanted to be in the American cultural discourse in 1959 did not see this film and then write about it. That's one thing I found quite extraordinary. Being a little older than you people, I kind of remember, I think I might have seen this film on TV as a young person who was hoping for, mushroom clouds and monsters. And then like John's son being like very, very put off by it. But I did have sort of like memories of those grim black and white images. But one thing going back to it and looking at the cultural response in 1959 was what a chord this film struck with the culture, because it did become a pop cultural occasion to get your mind around exactly what a hydrogen bomb nuclear holocaust would be.
Can we talk a little bit about the marketing? Because you were saying it was one of the first
Oh.
films that had multiple premieres around the world.
Yes, it had 18 simultaneous premieres everywhere, like from New York to Rome, and interestingly, Moscow as well. Now, the film was not commercially released in the Soviet Union, but there was a special premiere for the apparatchiks and the elites that Gregory Peck himself actually attended. So Stanley Kramer and his publicity people really put sort of a full-on ad pub push behind this motion picture to make it an event film. I guess maybe the closest analogy in our popular memory now, interestingly, would be Oppenheimer, where the film, Christopher Nolan does this international release, and basically everybody has to see it. And remarkably enough, even young people kind of flock to that film as an occasion to, revisit the creation of the atomic bomb and then the Red Scare afterwards. And so this really was an international release in a time in which films didn't do that. And in that sense, the film is talked about as historic and having that kind of international mass marketing. And it was marketed not as a fun film, even though there were pictures of Gregory Peck and Ava Gardner, of course, for the romance, but as a sort of a serious job of work. And so, if you ask the wife to go out to see On the Beach, rather than Some Like It Hot or one of the other great movies that came out in 1959, that you'd know what you were getting in for.
Not really a first date movie, really. Not a
No,
good time.
no, it depends on the date, but no,
It suggests the dating might be quite terminal, doesn't it? If you didn't
yeah, right.
It is not a long-term future.
Offer her a suicide pill at the end of the movie. Yeah, right.
That's right. Neat touch.
John, in the film, they kind of suggest that it's to do with the Russian-Chinese war, and they don't exactly know who's at fault. But this idea of, nuclear war affects everybody, and we're all doomed. That's something you've touched upon. Can you elaborate on that?
We could take it several ways, couldn't we, with this movie? The fact that it doesn't give a sense of the Soviet Union as the antagonist in this picture. In the optimistic sense, it allows a little bit of imagination for the viewer. It allows it allows a kind of mystery a little bit within the film, because your mind is thinking, well, what actually happened here? You're drawn to kind of trying to explain it for yourself. But also you could see this movie as a little bit of maybe a kind of cop out, a sense of not really tackling the issue head on, the reality of the situation, whereby everybody's very clear that the Soviet Union and the United States are in the Cold War, and this is a potential reality for everybody living around the world, including Australia. It's everybody, and there's and often we think of it in terms of countries, don't we? We think of it as, in Britain, how it affect the British, or the United States, how will it affect Americans. And one of the good messages or interesting things about Neville Shute's book that the film is based on, and the film itself, is that this is global. This is a sense that we are all doomed. And that kind of shifts things away from maybe even US centrism. It makes us think about humankind and species issues, that we might all die out to the species. And those are themes that are often picked up in sci-fi movies, aren't they? In apocalyptic movies, the idea of the human species being wiped out. But here we have it in this nuclear picture, and I think that's an important thing. And it also links the movie to bigger ideas about environmental collapse and environmental issues, that it's not just the local town or the city or even the country, it's all of us.
Interesting. Okay, let's go on to the characters in the film. The one saving grace. So I read the book. I found the book so deeply bleak that I'm kind of glad we're doing this and it's going to be out of the way and it's going to be my past, because it's been a rough few days. But the kind of saving grace, and sorry to be superficial here, is that it has two ridiculously beautiful leads, Moira and Dwight. Can we talk a bit about their relationship and how they're set up for the film? Tom, you can go first.
Well, as you note, it's Gregory Peck and Ava Gardner. So, full tilt boogie, Hollywood stars. We're kind of at the end of the old-fashioned star system, but they're veterans of it. And in Hollywood terms, they're really glammed down, especially Ava, who is very proud of this performance and also very proud that she, wasn't a clothes horse in it and, all glammed up. And they are such beautiful people. If you've read the book, you know that the character of Dwight, it does not, in the end, succumb to the charms of Ava Gardner, Moira. And in the movie, and this is sort of the difference between literature and a film, that Stanley Kramer knew, and Neville Shute really objected to this in the end, that he knew that two beautiful people like this, who have no filial obligations, who are facing the end of the world, are going to hook up, right? That it isn't just sort of Hollywood convention. It's the power of their cinematic beauty. We want them to get together. And Shute can get away with that in the novel. But when you see Gregory Peck and Ava Gardner, we know they're going to get together. And Stanley Kramer famously said, when an audience sees these two, we know they're going to have more than a handshake at the end of the film. And Shute really objected to that. And that's one of the things that sort of keeps us going, whether Dwight will recognize that his wife and children are in fact dead, that he keeps the conceit, or whether he'll, go along with it with Ava Gardner. And maybe one final thing about the performances in the film is there's this remarkable long take close up where Gregory Peck is talking about how, as a soldier, you sort of become inured to the fact that you might get killed. But on the home front, you know that your wife and children are okay. And in fact, you're fighting for their safety, a very kind of World War II, a veteran mentality that must have really resonated with a lot of guys in 1959. And he talks about that quite movingly, which I think is really one of Gregory Peck's best moments on screen.
I can't cope with it. My kids and all the planning since the day they were born. Sharon and I, we were the sort of people who, we would have been happy to grow old together.
But I find that an extraordinarily moving moment. And the film has a couple of those moments, and they're all, I think, Ava Gardner and Gregory Peck's moments.
It's interesting because you say that Ava Gardner was dressed down, but that actually isn't possible. So it's a bit of a futile kind of like thing. You can't actually do that. But it's very interesting, and I can understand why the writer was upset, because in the book, many of the themes are to do with the denial that people won't let go, even though they're like in the book, Peter and Mary are, they're planting the garden for next year that they're never going to see, and all these plans that they have in place. So I can understand why he was upset, but you can't have all of that stuff in a film, and that's sadly how films work.
Well, do you know the famous comment by Kurt Vonnegut on science fiction and why he doesn't have love stories in his science fiction? I always found this so interesting. He says that the power of heterosexual closure and romance is so great that, and he wanted to talk about other issues. He says, if you end the world on page 250, the reader doesn't care as long as the couple gets together on page 249.
Yeah. Other characters of interest. Now, this is Fred Astaire in apparently his first serious role as a scientist. John, do you want to take Fred Astaire as a non-tap dancing character?
Yeah, I mean, I can do. I think that actually, I mean, he comes up with some of the great lines, doesn't he, about being doomed, and kind of provides us with the scientist being regretful, having kind of almost, lost himself because of the danger of the atom, and that classic kind of scientist created a kind of, the Frankenstein's monster kind of thing, whereby you have that sense of huge guilt and desperation. And I think Fred Astaire actually is pretty good in capturing those sentiments to me, and I found him, I was kind of warmed to his kind of recklessness, his sense of emotion coming across, that he felt that way. And it's something that crops up in other movies. I mean, we have like the scientist in Them, who kind of talks about, what have we done, what are scientists doing. So it's a kind of theme whereby you go to the scientist and they kind of have a response. We kind of, they're also offered as experts, aren't they? And if they're regretting what they've done, we kind of trust that kind of regret more. But yeah, in terms of him, I thought he was a great character. I don't know what Tom thought.
Yeah, I'd agree. I was a little distracted by his really bad toupee, which I think they could have done something with. But the whole science military thing is kind of another trope of The Thing and all the other great science fiction films. The military really is absolved from any kind of guilt in all this. Everybody's still in their uniform and obeying orders, and you do get that sense that we're on automatic until the moment comes when we have to actually imbibe the cyanide capsules, which will be just distributed by the government.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because although he does express feeling bad about it at the initial party where they all gather, someone tries to blame the scientists, and that's also the thing of how it's a universal film, because he's like, well, you can't blame the scientists.
Now we know where the blame lies, don't we?
Oh, no, you don't. No. Maybe we were the blind mechanics of disaster, but you don't pin the guilt on the scientists that easily. You might as well pin it on motherhood.
Well, it should be pinned on somebody.
It is like the way they've framed it, that concept of blame is so irrelevant because people want to know the reason why. But the reason why is kind of like because human nature is somewhat inherently suicidal in itself. Okay, so two more of the main characters are Peter and Mary, who are like the younger couple. Tom, you're not that impressed with them.
No, I'm not, and part of this might be my age. Of course, when you're a teenager, you identify with Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate, and then as you get older, you just think he's a spoiled brat. And it might be part of just the star power of Gregory Peck and Ava Gardner. These are old pros, and then you got Tony Perkins, who like anytime you look at Perkins in a pre-Psycho film, all you can think of is his Psycho persona the next year. And then Donna Anderson, who just seems like, a whining, spoiled brat little girl. And you don't really get the poignancy that you should from the fact that this couple is actually going to murder their baby in a way that's kind of understandable. But that choice is just so horrible that you don't feel what you should. And I think a lot of that is because of the way the characters are written and also the performers. Perkins has this one moment, I don't know, John, or if you guys saw it, where they're in bed talking about poisoning the baby. And Perkins kind of looks off screen just a little bit, and you can see the glint of Norman Bates in his eyes, like he's actually kind of anticipating this moment. I'm reading it backwards, but
It could also be because, I mean, I feel like Psycho limited Perkins quite a lot
oh
because
yeah,
it's
yeah,
such a seminal film and role.
yeah,
Like, can we ever? It's a bit like Leslie Nielsen. Like, can we see him in a
yeah,
serious role after he did? Yeah, it's one of
yeah,
those kind of things.
yeah. It is so dominant. Uh, but he just seems like the couple just seems a little off in kind of what you should really feel with them, unlike with Ava and Greg, who have like lived a life that they're having everything denied them. Their married life, raising their children, that these are young people in the prime of life who are being denied everything. And you kind of don't feel that. I think you feel much more of a sense of loss for what Ava and Greg are not going to have now.
I think that's such a good read. I think there's a kind of maturity and reflectiveness and kind of sense of real emotion with Ava and Gregory,
Hmm.
Peck's relationship that does come across strongly in the movie. Whereas, yeah, with Mary and Peter, the characters, the younger characters, they get some really good potential scenes, don't they? The scene on the beach where they're together, and then they get the couple of times the suicide pill it's introduced, and then they make that final decision over it. Those scenes should be, the most powerful in the film in a way. They're
Hmm.
especially over, the child, but somehow they don't quite lodge
Mm,
that way, do they? And I think Tom's just got it completely right with that. And it was odd, the kind of how he looks away
Yeah,
on the bed. Well, it felt
yeah,
an awkward scene. I mean, the bed should be a place of kind of real kind of intimacy
yeah.
and pain at that moment. And it seems somehow weirdly distant, or I felt kind of removed from it. And as I say, it's sad because those are so meaningful.
Hmm.
mm.
Yeah. And the other relationship scene, I think the moment where Ava is clearly now in love with Gregory Peck and they're frolicking on the beach and he calls her by his wife's name,
Mm.
Sharon. And of course, it ruins the moment. But the thing I find so remarkable about that whole dynamic, and she says it later when they're walking on the streets, is she totally understands that she's never going to replace Sharon and Gregory Peck's life, but she's kind of okay with that. She even says, like, I can be here for you. That she is so needy for Gregory Peck that she's willing in some ways to erase her own self to be the woman that he needs her to be. I think again there's kind of this World War II backstory to me where there are a lot of couples who have lost the love of their life and they have to move on, and the other partner knows that they're never going to be able to replace the person that died
Mm.
during wartime, but they love the person enough where they're going to have to do that, or they're willing to do it. And this, I don't know if it's like this in the novel. Do you have that same sense of her desperation?
Both of them have that express that sentiment that if the world wasn't ending, they would fight tooth and nail to take him away from his wife, type of thing, and eventually he'd get over like his
Yeah,
family, type of thing, which is quite mean. But the idea, I think, in the film very much is because then she goes to Osborne, which is Fred Astaire's character, and she talks about her fear of being alone. And
yeah,
they're the two people who don't have people, because
yeah,
Fred Astaire also talks to Anthony Perkins when he's complaining about how his wife doesn't understand that they're going to have to use these pills and blah, blah, blah. And they're saying, and he said, I've never been jealous of anyone, but I'm jealous that you have someone to care about at this point.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's that fear, the fear of being alone, or a fear of not being able to share this impending doom with somebody,
Hmm.
for both of them, which I think is quite interesting because, the threads are fear for them, but then Fred Astaire's got his regrets of never having had a Ferrari, and now he finally gets. It's really interesting how different people are dealing with the end of the world, and then there's the denial that Mary feels, which is just like, oh no, we'll be fine, and I'll we won't need to commit suicide because I have to look after Jennifer, and he has to sit down and explain to her, well, the baby is also going to be part of this. It's just like she hadn't thought of that or something. It's very interesting. Can we talk a little bit about the submarine shenanigans? Because there's a couple of things, 2 scenes I think that are quite interesting. First of all, they're searching for the signal. But let's go to the more interesting one, which I think is when they get to San Francisco, they call up one of the guys on Submarine, and they're like, this is where Swain's home is. He'd like to have a look from the periscope. And then he jumps ship. Tom?
That whole San Francisco interlude is very spooky. And I think that sort of second act where they get on the submarine and go to San Francisco is sort of a privileged space in the movie. I thought my TV was off for a second until I realized that the cinematographer actually was a different cinematographer than the guy who shot the Italian, what's his name, Giuseppe Rotono, who shot the kind of the neo-realist scenes in Australia. They went for a different look in San Francisco, so it's a lot hazier to evoke the kind of the nuclear haze. And that guy jumping off ship, it's just such a strange scene where he's talking to the submarine as he's fishing, which doesn't seem especially rational. And maybe it's something he always did in San Francisco Bay. And that moment, the whole San Francisco scene, I think, is a very weird and quirky move in the film. And I think also for just visual differentiation, it's important because we're feeling so claustrophobic, even in the wide outback spaces of Australia, that it's a relief to get on the submarine and then have somebody go off ship, both the guy who jumped ship and then the other guy who goes into the, whatever it is, a water plant or something, or electrical grid plant to trace the signal, which turns out to be a Coke bottle doing Morse code or something. Yeah.
John, thoughts on the rebellion of Swain jumping off the ship and then also of this Coke bottle fiasco?
Yeah, I actually really like this section because it seemed like we were actually kind of moving into the kind of sci-fi zone and the kind of mystery zone.
Yeah.
And you get that amazing music, don't you? It's all a bit chaotic. My mind jumps to kind of 1960s Star Trek movies where they're filming a section that's really in California, but instead it's another world and there's nobody around, and you know that it's weird because there's music clanging and everything's kind of exciting. And I liked how the presence of the Golden Gate Bridge in there, but the absence of everything, the fact that we've got no cars, we've got no people. I can't even remember whether there's much wildlife or not, or I'm not too sure on that, but there's a sense of kind of this is not like we're used to. This is something unworldly and strange and alien, when it should be a familiar space, shouldn't it? And that really kind of chimed with me. And it's kind of in the movie you feel like this is important. This is a kind of reveal of the nuclear reality, even though in reality we'd have some dead bodies lying around on the streets, wouldn't we? And we'd have some mess. I mean, San Francisco is looking very tidy here. It's looking very clean. But yeah, those are great scenes for me. And yeah, the periscope scene whereby the conversation takes place between the person who's really doomed themselves and the submarine commander. That has a certain kind of comedic. I almost laughed at that when the periscope comes out of the water, and it's there's like some sort of sexist Batman scene or something. That you're gonna I wanted to laugh when would be really inappropriate. And again, the sense of the Morse code when they're looking for how is this communication coming, and
also quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Did you, because of the whole tone of this film, When you first saw it, did you think there was hope that someone would be surviving on the side of this Morse code?
But I actually kind of knew there would be nothing there. I think that the film sets it up that
Mm.
the answers are always going to not be what you want, and it's going to be kind of some sort of flaw or issue. Whereas in a lot of nuclear kind of post-nuclear movies, we're going to find at least some mutants, or we're going to find something quite scary, aren't we? Or some sort of creature's going to jump out at you. But instead, we get a Coca-Cola bottle in this, which is, it's a symbol in itself, but it's certainly not as exciting as some sort of 30-foot monster, is it?
Yeah.
But even a
Yeah.
survivor, like when I was watching it, I was like, well, this is going to be interesting what it is. But just because this is such a depressing film, I just know they're not going to have a survivor there.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I didn't expect that. Yeah.
I think the discovery of the Coca-Cola bottle, it's interesting how it's almost like life has been suspended, isn't it, at that point? And
it would be a
yeah.
Coca-Cola. It would be a Coca-Cola bottle. Like the symbol of American capitalism. Projected to the world. And if you flash forward, the Coca-Cola machine plays a great role in Doctor Strangelove as well. So you've got sort of this, nuclear annihilation Coca-Cola motif that's working through some of our films.
And that's brilliant. It's brilliant, isn't it? Like Fallout games, they use Nuka-Cola, and this sense of like American capitalism, or the symbol of it, kind of outlasting nuclear decay or surviving nuclear weaponry. And I also like with that scene how it's also kind of quiet and desperate and silent, and then we have the scene next, which is I think is the horse in Australia, isn't it? Or we return to Australia soon after, and you've got this horse, and they describe the horse as so full of life.
Yeah.
And it's such a great move between the static and then the suddenly kind of bursting with life, still at least for a few months or a bit of time left in Australia.
Very nice. Okay, I want to talk about Osborne and his car race, because he's decided that after years and years of being a scientist, he wants to live his best life before it's over. Thoughts on his Ferrari racing obsession?
Yeah, well, I think it gives us an opportunity for a little bit of action. And some of that stunt work is really interesting. The Jennifer Frost book didn't talk much about it, but it's really some extraordinary race car sequences. And of course, this is the age before CGI. So, these cars are really tumbling down the road. And I thought for sure that Fred Astaire was going to go out in a blaze of glory. If it were me and my Ferrari, after I won the race, I'd continue going and then, go out that way, because you're sort of led that. I know this is narratively and thematically appropriate with the film. And in keeping with that, he just goes out the punk way, which is like the exhaust fumes. I mean, that's just, and it is appropriate that he's going to, suffocate, go out the kind of the way a businessman who has been caught embezzling might go out, but not in a, not in this heroic way, which I thought we were being led up for.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like it's playing with the audience a bit there, isn't it? Because you're really expecting that blaze of glory, and instead it becomes death in a very domestic and mundane and kind of really very normal kind of death, doesn't it? It's whereas we're expecting a spectacular kind of heroic kind of explosion. I also like with Tom. I mean, the filming of it. It was really refreshing, isn't it? But I mean, I watched so many CGI movies, and it's actually great to see like real cars do real stunts, and there's a power to that. I mean, I sometimes go to motor racing, and you get that same sense that this is real, this is happening, and the film's great at capturing that. I think that's one of the things of these older Hollywood movies. You get that realism.
And you probably heard that the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has just inaugurated a special Oscar for a best stunt design, and I am sure that they'll probably have really rigorous requirements and protocols for the stunt being real. Because so much of what you see on screen is now green screen. Can we talk about the suicide motif just for a little bit?
Yeah, let's talk about it.
The suicide thing, I think, is quite striking in terms of where Hollywood's production code was at the time. 59 is still the time in which Hollywood is regulated by a pretty strict production code. Joseph Breen, who was the real Victorian censor of Hollywood from 34 to 54, has retired. And what you see throughout the 1950s is the code kind of cracking each year, that there's a kind of a transgression that Hollywood is allowed to make that it would have never have been allowed to make under Joe Breen or even the year before. And one of the things the code was very concerned about, especially under the Irish Catholic Joe Breen, was suicide as a kind of viable option for the characters. And he was always fighting back against, lazy screenwriters who wanted to, end their story with having the character commit suicide. And the character in a narrative in Hollywood, rather than commit suicide, would or suicide by cop even, would have to be reformed by or punished by civil and legal authority. And this film actually posits suicide as a viable option. And that's quite rare. There was some debate about it in the production code, but by then the code didn't have the kind of teeth and enforcement power it did before 1959. And what I found interesting is that the Roman Catholic Legion of Decency, which was the Catholic private pressure group, which was very concerned about these issues, actually cleared the film and gave it not a condemned rating, which would have been the commercial kiss of death, or a B rating, objectionable in part for everybody, gave it an A3 rating, which basically meant that this film is okay for mature adults. And the argument that Kramer made, and he went right to the Legion on this and talked with the Monsignor in charge of this and must have had a very interesting conversation, is that the planet itself, humanity itself, had already committed suicide. So the suicide of the individuals is in some ways redundant because the entire species has decided to commit suicide. And I found that quite interesting, that the Legion actually had this theological discussion with Stanley Kramer, and Kramer persuaded them that the film should not be condemned, that in fact, watching this film would persuade people of what they are doing with nuclear war is a kind of suicide.
Interesting.
Yeah.
John, suicide.
And this is such a pleasant conversation that we're having here about this film.
That's right.
What method of suicide would you?
No, we won't go into that.
There needs to be an engagement with, our collective responsibility over the environment, over the, nuclear war, over technology, and we often don't really take on those responsibilities. This idea of collective suicide is very intriguing in that way, and I think dealing with it in a way that it does on the beach, in the way that it does tackle suicide, I think it's done in a really effective way. I was also thinking, I don't even know quite why, but I was remembering, like in Soylent Green, and a 1970s, early 70s sci-fi movie. There's the use of like euthanasia clinics, and kind of the idea of, should we take kind of our own suicide to help save the planet? Kind of.
Logan's Run is the other example where you turn 30 and that's it. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. You need to kind of dealing with worries about overpopulation, and here we have on the beach with worries over nuclear war. But these are all are issues that we need to tackle, and I think these films are doing that in really kind of meaningful ways.
Something you said that was quite interesting was a nuclear film that doesn't appeal to the conflict and aggression and those kind of tensions, but just with the kind of emptiness and loss and grief and loneliness. Maybe having a savior or a religion or a redemption in that would take away from the meaning of the film.
Yeah, I think so. I think that if you introduce Christianity, or if you introduce the idea that there's an afterlife, or you're going to be saved, or you're going to get redemption, and or that's going to help you cope with this scenario, it takes away some of the messaging, doesn't it? And I think that the film is so effective at creating a sense of aloneness and kind of emptiness. That would have been maybe kind of played with if they'd introduced one of the characters, as a priest or something like that.
Right. You have that Salvation Army, which is sort of a non-denominational, ephemeral Protestant, but the name of Christ is not invoked, and certainly there is no priest there who would certainly be counseling you, to have your confession and communion, and then to suffer through the radiation sickness and offer it up to God. You do not commit suicide. That's, God has given you life. That's his prerogative, which would have been the traditional Roman Catholic way of looking at it. And you don't see that in the film at all. There is no sense of kind of that this could lead to your salvation, offering up your suffering to God, which is how the priest would have counseled you.
But I do like how the film has a sense of kind of intriguing peacefulness with it all, and kind of quietness and over this issue, whereby in a way maybe we'd want to be kind of raging about how unfair it is, or you'd be thinking of it conventionally in terms of what the evil Soviet Union is doing, something like that. But instead we have almost a calm over death by the end of it, and that's an incredibly mature reflection too that the film's offering.
Okay, and on that wonderfully optimistic note, we will go on to the legacy of the film. John.
I mean, Tom spoke of this a little bit at the beginning, didn't you, Tom, about how, in a sense, we think of movies from the 50s or atomic movies, and we don't go to On the Beach. We do want the spectacle, we want the excitement, and we want the fantasy of it, don't we? And I think that cuts against On the Beach and its legacy. And sometimes films are more important in their moment than they are much later. I mean, another film I was thinking of was, the China Syndrome of the late 70s, which is, a film about a nuclear accident starring Michael Douglas and Jane Fonda. That was a big release in 1979 because it interacted with 3 Mile Island, which was a real nuclear accident in the US. And that film was important in that moment, but we never go back to that movie now. And it's a kind of a time capsule caught in the 1970s. And in a way, On the Beach feels like it's, a kind of in a different period from us today. And it doesn't seem to have that kind of the qualities maybe that we want in that way.
Yeah. And I think that's why I'd really recommend this film to people who are interested in Cold War cinema or science fiction films generally, because it was so impactful at the time. It says so much about the culture, and it really sort of casts a light on those other films that we routinely do go back to because they're more fun for us. And I'd really recommend this film to any serious viewer of science fiction cinema. Maybe in some ways, even as a counterexample of what the movies usually give us. The films, it's kind of hard to get a sense of the box office. The film allegedly lost $700,000. That's the figure you usually hear from Tino Ballio, who did the United Artists book, and that everybody seems to cite. On the other side of it, it did very well at the box office in terms of the money that came in, the gross. All the local box office reports say that the film is, bringing them in. So I assume the film costs so much to make and so much to distribute. So you have to send prints to, 18 different locales. So I think if the film had been more economically handled, it might have turned a profit, because it really does seem that virtually any serious person who is interested in film went to this movie in 1959, and it engaged everybody at kind of the highest levels of conversation.
Wonderful. Okay, can we go to recommendations? Tom.
Okay, I would recommend the aforementioned book by Jennifer Frost, a film scholar, on Stanley Kramer, called Producer of Controversy, Stanley Kramer, Hollywood Liberalism and the Cold War. She has an excellent chapter on the beach for people who want wider insight into culture of the Cold War. my former colleague Stephen Whitfield's book, The Culture of the Cold War, not just about film, but all aspects of the Cold War. And quickly, 2 motion picture documentaries, one from 1982, a film you're probably familiar with, Atomic Cafe, which is a compilation of some of the looniest newsreels and government information films warning us about nuclear war and telling us how we can actually survive a nuclear war by getting under our desk at school. And another more serious film is and a good companion piece to Chris Nolan's Oppenheimer is The Day After Trinity by John Elsey, a film about Oppenheimer and the creation of the atomic bomb. It's really a wonderful movie made in 1981. Oppenheimer's dead, but Edward Teller's there. A lot of the voices that would not be in a documentary today are in the film. So those are the books and literature or film I would recommend.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. John?
I mean, there's lots that you could look up to do with atomic culture and atomic movies. Jerome Shapiro's Atomic Bomb Cinema comes to mind. I really love, and it's old now, Stephen Wyatt's Nuclear Fear, where a kind of culture of nuclear images and kind of understanding how we become kind of so obsessed and anxious about nuclear war. I think that's a brilliant book. I think that there's lots of nuclear movies that we could talk about or people could watch, but I do think as a kind of a contrast to this movie and seeing how things change and are updated in the 80s, then maybe like Testament or The Day After kind of show those 2 films. You could watch those and think about how have things moved on but stayed the same from On the Beach in the late 1950s.
Great. Thank you so much to both of you for coming on the show.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Great. That's it for this episode. Next episode, I'm going to aim for something far more light-hearted, which is Teenagers from Outer Space. Take a look at the show notes to find out where you can watch that. Thank you so much for bearing with me while I'm trying to figure out this monetization thing. As mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, it has been a little problematic. I do intend to put changes in place so the listening experience is better for everyone out there. In the meantime, if you wanted to support the podcast, you can leave a review or a rating on your favourite podcasting app, as that helps other people discover the podcast or at least know that other people out there enjoy it. Aside from that, you can get ad-free episodes on patreon.com/every sci-fi film, where there are a few other tiers if you want a few extra things that I'm offering. Thank you again for everyone listening, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.